Good morning, St. John's. We're going to get going in just a moment. I'm so excited to introduce our speaker this morning. If you want to come on in and have a seat. Welcome to those of you here in person and those of you joining us online. I'm Tina Clark, the Director of Formation here at St. John's, and I would love to bring up our speaker. And I will open us quickly in prayer. May the Lord be with you. Almighty God, thank you for the people gathered here today, in person and online. Thank you for the work of the gentleman we are about to introduce, for his presence in our community, for the people who work with him and the people that they work with. Shine your light and give them strength in the ministry that they offer to the Denver community. All this we pray in the name of your Son, our Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen. Everybody say good morning, Isir. Did I say it right? Isir is Dr. Halim Ali's daughter, and I have asked her to introduce her dad very briefly.
Okay, so I just like to say a couple of things with my dad because I know we have a limited time here. But what I really love about my dad is he's so excited whenever he gets to do these things, and he loves doing public service and stuff, and it just lights up his day, and it's so cute and stuff like that. But anyways, yeah, so I hope that he really enjoys this because I know how excited he was in the car. He was bouncing around and stuff. So without further ado, Dr. Halim Ali.
All right, there we go. Greetings and blessings, beautiful people, this morning. I am here. I'm Dr. Halim Ali, the Executive Director and the founder of From the Heart Foundation. I'm going to talk a little more about my foundation a little later. I'd like to jump straight into what we've come to talk about and what we're here to do. We offer a program called the Wellness Recovery Action Plan, and it was developed by a lady by the name of Mary Ellen Copeland. Here is a testimony from Mary Ellen that encouraged her to begin this program in 1983. I'm not a doctor with a fancy degree. I did not learn the information I am about to share with you at a prestigious college or a university. I learned about recovery from thousands of people who, like me, experience mental health difficulties. For some, these challenges are a minor inconvenience. For others, they are a major factor from time to time, and still others have difficulties that are so overwhelming that they have totally overtaken their lives. I have learned how these people live with such challenges on a day-to-day basis, how they cope with and relieve these challenges, and how they go on to do the things they want to do with their lives. My studies began in an effort to learn how to control the horrible feelings that had taken over my own life. I first learned about mental illness and psychiatric symptoms when I was a young child, 8 years old at the time. My mother began spending all day, every day, sitting in a rocking chair, rocking and crying. Before that, our family life was nearly idyllic. Ma had left behind her career to spend her full time engaging her family in a variety of activities, from gardening, raising chickens, to sewing and cooking. She supported and encouraged activities, creativity, and individuality, even though her hospitalization began when I was 8 years old. She left me with a rich array of skills I have used all my life and a love for the natural world, which has sustained me through many hard times. Sometimes when we went to visit her, she was in a very severe depression, thin and unkempt. She pulled her hair back severely and always wore the same clothes. She hardly knew we were there. She would repeat over and over words we did not understand while she walked in circles, wringing her hands and crying. At other times, she was very exuberant, laughing and talking loudly, behaving in a manner that was bizarre and even embarrassing. Her doctors told us to forget about her, that she was incurably insane and would never get well. We, her 5 children, went to visit her every Saturday, even after the doctors told us not to come anymore. But my mother did get well. After 8 years, care providers started noticing that my mother was helping to care for the other patients. She even started what may have been one of the first support groups back in the early 50s. She started getting the patients together to talk to each other. She got discharged and went on to work for 20 years as the director of an inner city hot lunch program and enjoyed a rich and full retirement. And I'd like to take a moment to comment on that. It appears to me that sometimes the cure is in helping others, right? Sometimes the cure happens when we pay it forward. When the deep depressions that had plagued me since my mother's hospitalization became overwhelming to me, I sought out help from a psychiatrist. I wanted a magic pill, and the doctor gave me just that. Actually, several pills that made me feel a lot better, but I didn't learn anything about the depression, nothing about changing my hectic and chaotic lifestyle. The pills kept me well for a time, but eventually the depressions overtook me again. This time, they seemed like they were taking away my life. I had repeated hospitalizations. I was allergic to many of the medications they tried. I looked for information on how to help myself and found that no such information existed. So with the help of a wonderful vocational rehabilitation counselor, I started studying how people who experience mental health difficulties get well, stay well, and live the lives they want to lead. I started doing the things they did, and I got better and better. I still have to work every day on my wellness. Sometimes I feel quite depressed, but now I know how to help myself. My periods of depression are very brief. I am here today to share with you the things I've learned, including the Wellness Recovery Action Plan. So let's get started, shall we? When we talk about recovery and wellness, when I was first introduced to the idea of recovery, I thought it only referred to those coming through addiction. I grew up with severe anger issues. I had both my mother and my father in the home, and I still ended up joining a gang when I was 17. By the time I was 19, I had been shot and almost killed. And I didn't still look at recovery as an option. It wasn't ever introduced to me. And I had to walk backwards through my life to where what led me to the front of that shooter's gun. Anger issues. Being the middle child of 5 boys, going to school at 7, 8 years old with black eyes on my face because my older brothers had beat me up. It produced in me a rage and an anger, right, that made me act out. Multiple suspensions, multiple arrests, right? So when I became part of the prevention team in 2018 at Human Services, the prevention team called DPALS, Denver Parent Advocates Lending Support, I was introduced to the Wellness Recovery Action Plan. And I taught it for 2 years. I personally trained and certified over 400 people in 2 years and still never did it myself. Because I said, I don't need this stuff. I don't have any mental health issues, right? Because the stigma that's connected to mental health is you're crazy, you're psycho, you're loony, all of the terms that none of us like or none of us want to be, right? But when I started really looking at it, I said, wait a minute, this is me. This is me. And it started to make sense. And I started to do the work, and I began to see a drastic change in my life. I was happier. I was always smiling, laughing, and everyone around me noticed the change. And they said, what are you doing? And so in 2021, we do this thing called the Train the Trainer. It's a 3-day training where I train people to teach the Wellness Recovery Action Plan. We did 11 in 2021. I trained over 100 people in 2021 in this modality. But recovery has only recently become a word used in relation to the experience of mental health challenges. Those of us who experience mental health challenges are commonly told that these difficulties are incurable, right? That we will have to live with them for the rest of our lives, that the medications, if healthcare providers can find the right ones or the right combination, may help, and that we will always have to take the medications. Many of us have even been told that these difficulties will worsen as we get older. Nothing about recovery was ever mentioned. Nothing about hope. Nothing about anything we can do to help ourselves. Nothing about empowerment. Nothing about wellness. So here's a testimony. When I was first diagnosed with manic depression at the age of 37, I was told that if I just kept taking these pills that I would need to take for the rest of my life, I would be okay. So I did just that. And I was okay for about 10 years until a stomach virus caused severe lithium poisoning. After that, I could no longer take the medication. During the time I was taking the medication, I could have been learning how to manage my moods, right? I could have been learning that relaxation and stress reduction techniques and fun activities can help reduce these difficulties. I could have been learning that I would probably feel a lot better if my life wasn't so hectic and chaotic. If I wasn't living in an abusive relationship. If I spent more time with people who affirmed and validated me. And that support from other people who have experienced these challenges helps a lot. I was never told that I could learn how to relieve, reduce, and even get rid of these troubling feelings and perceptions. Perhaps if I had learned these things and had been exposed to others who were working their way through these kind of difficulties, I would not have spent weeks, months, and years experiencing extreme psychotic mood swings while doctors searched diligently to find effective medication. So when it comes to the Wellness Recovery Action Plan, we have 2 parts that are interrelated. The first part, these are our 5 key concepts, right? Our 5 key concepts. What I have brought today and what is being live streamed is actually what we call From the Heart, our wellness house. This is our wellness house, right? And I was going to fill it out while I was here, but I had a copy. I apologize about the wrinkles. However, our wellness house, when we're talking about a house, we know that the foundation is everything, right? So the foundation of our wellness house is our 5 key concepts. Our 5 key concepts, which are hope, personal responsibility, self-advocacy, education, and support. But when we're talking about education, we're talking about self-discovery, self-awareness, what we know about ourselves. We are the expert on ourselves. I am the expert on Halim as you are the expert on you, right? No one can write your rap or your wellness recovery for you, and nobody can do the work but you. When we talk about hope, I want to emphasize we're not talking about a passive hope. We're talking about active hope. We're talking about hope coupled with action. All right? We do while we hope. So this is our 5 key concepts, our foundation: hope, personal responsibility, self-advocacy, education, and support. Now, as we begin to move up our house, what we call these items are our recovery topics. So we have our 5 key concepts. Our first recovery topic, our wellness toolbox. Within our wellness toolbox, we all know what a toolbox does, especially the men in the room, right? We have our wrench, screwdriver, hammer, right? We have our power tools. We have our saw. All of the things that we need to be constructive and productive. In our wellness toolbox, it's the same thing. Except in our wellness toolbox, these are the things that we need to do every day to be our best selves. So within our wellness toolbox, we can have 200 items. We can say exercise. We can say traveling. We can say watching a movie, right? Whatever makes you feel good, walking the dog, taking a cold shower, going to the amusement park. All these things can be in your wellness toolbox. But what ends up happening is with our daily maintenance plan, which is the next step, this is where we put our tools in time, right? Because think about our New Year's resolution. Every year we say we're going to do something, but oftentimes it doesn't get done because we don't put it in time. So if I say, I'm going to start working out this year, until I say, I'm going to start working out Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 7 a.m. to 8 a.m., it may not happen. But that's putting it in time, which makes it real. That's what we do with our daily maintenance plan. We bring our wellness tools to life through our daily maintenance plan, right? Now, here's where it gets interesting. Stressors, usually referred to as triggers. In Wellness Recovery Action Plan, we have substituted the word triggers for stressors, right? Because triggers, most crime survivors have found triggers to be a violent term, right? So we use stressors. But what ends up happening is your daily maintenance plan helps to mitigate your stressors. So we have a stressor action plan for those things in life which we know may stress us out. So for me, I know sometimes, and I feel like I've done pretty well with mitigating this stressor, but road rage, right? So with road rage, what I've had to do for my stressors action plan, because it was a stressor, I said, okay, now, because people are always going to drive crazy. You can't control what other people do. So I said, what I'm going to do, I'm going to start leaving earlier for appointments, and I'm going to do the speed limit, and I'm going to focus. And whatever other people are doing, and then I started doing what I call playing the what if game. What if this person is speeding because they're going to the hospital to see their mother, or a crisis is going on in their family? Right? Giving the other person the benefit of the doubt as opposed to falling into a state of rage and confrontation, right? Because now, if we don't catch this, and now if you're true to, let me just say this, if you're true to your daily maintenance plan, you shouldn't be too moved by the stressors. But if you're not, if you don't have your daily maintenance plan and say this stressor is not mitigated at this level, it becomes an early warning sign. When we talk about early warning signs, we're talking about the things we feel, right? The anxiety, the beating of the chest, the swelling up in the solar plexus. So now if I haven't mitigated it and said a prayer for this person who is speeding, then I start to feel these early warning signs. And like I said, we all know what our early warning signs are, right? Now, this early warning sign, I need an action plan. But what we have to understand is as we move upward towards the roof of our house, we have less options as far as our wellness toolbox. Because drinking a glass of water before 7 a.m. may be in your wellness toolbox. But once you're experiencing early warning signs, you may need more than a glass of water in order to come back down to a place of equanimity, right? So now the early warning signs are happening, right? And before rap, that heart would start beating. And then being unaware of what's happening or unable to mitigate it, it turns into when things are breaking down and getting much worse. These are the signs that other people can see. Early warning signs, these are the feelings. When things are breaking down, these are the signs. So in cognitive behavioral therapy, we talk about thought, feeling, behavior, right? Thought. The thought is, this person is disrespecting me. How dare he cut me off like this, right? The feeling becomes anger. That's where we are here. So now we're weaving in and out of traffic. I'm trying to catch him so I can cut him off. I got to get even, right? I got to get even. How dare he? So now things are breaking down, right? This is all about crisis alleviation, because the crisis happens when I catch up to him and both of us have gotten out of our car. It can be a possible life change for both of us at that point. There was on CPR News about a year ago, I heard a story of a school teacher who was in a road rage incident with both of his daughters in the back seat. And he catches up to the guy. They cut each other off, flip each other off, get out the car. The school teacher pushes this guy. The guy trips over a parking block, falls and hits his head and dies in front of his daughters. That quick. He went from stressor to crisis. What we have to understand about crisis is once we get here, we have fewer options. Now, with each step, you see we have an action plan, but it is not wise to create a crisis action plan when in crisis. It rarely works. It rarely works. Your adrenaline's moving, your thoughts are racing, right? You're almost a wreck, right? And the thing is, a lot of us don't realize when we're in crisis. So when my father passed away in 2009, I didn't realize I was in crisis until 2012. I was living in crisis, a perpetual state of crisis. I had normalized crisis. All of my thoughts came from a crisis perspective. I was ruining relationships, blaming everybody else because I was hurt and I didn't know what to do. I didn't understand that I had tools that I could lean on. So I chose addiction. And I ended up homeless, right? So this is how quickly stressors can turn into crisis. So within our recovery topics, we have our wellness toolbox. Then our daily maintenance plan, which consists of how we use our wellness toolbox every day. The way you use your wellness toolbox throughout the week or your daily maintenance plan throughout the week when you have to go to work is going to be a little different than the way you use it on the weekends, right? When you don't have to go to work. Maybe your wellness, in my daily maintenance plan on the weekends, I'm very intentional. My daughter did not want to come. I woke her up and I said, look, I got to get some one-on-one time with you. So after we're done, then we'll go thrifting. Right? So I had to borrow, but she's part of my daily maintenance plan. I have to be intentional about how I spend my time and make sure that she gets her dad, right? So the daily maintenance plan, and then as we move up, stressors. All this is to identify what's going on, what are the things that are happening in our lives that may create uncomfortable feelings. So we have our stressors, our stressor action plan. If we don't mitigate it there, we move into early warning signs action plan. If we don't mitigate it there, It moves to when things are breaking down, and then it goes up to crisis and crisis action plan. Now, here's the thing. After crisis, in the post-crisis section, it may be some things we need to fix. It may be some people we need to apologize to. It may be some needed amends. In our post-crisis space, it may be some people we need to thank for being there for us during crisis, right? So we may need to have a drastic life change. We may need to get a new job. We may need to find new housing, right? There's a plethora of things that happen after the crisis, but the important thing is to identify what may have brought on the crisis in the first place. What may have brought it on in the first place? So there's a story that I share in my trainings, and there's a lady, we use her name, and I'll just say Sally, for instance. And Sally ended up being in, and when we talk about crisis, we're talking about a state that is so extreme where other people have to typically take over your responsibilities and your daily duties, where you can no longer perform your daily duties, right? So with Sally, she ended up in crisis, and one of her family members had to take over her daily duties. But when Sally walked backwards from her crisis, she said, well, when things were breaking down, I remember I went on that long car ride, and I should have stopped, had my husband stop every hour so I can walk for 5 to 10 minutes. And she said, looking even further back with early warning signs, I remember when I was cleaning the yard, and instead of taking a break and doing it in 30-minute increments, I did it for 4 hours, right? So in walking back from your crisis, you can see the things that led to the crisis, because crisis doesn't just happen overnight. It's some things that led up to that crisis, right? So this is an opportunity in post-crisis to reflect on what brought on the original crisis. So with the Wellness Recovery Action Plan, this is one of the modalities that From the Heart offers to our community in spaces where we're talking about suicide prevention and ideation, gun violence awareness, where we're talking about mental health, behavioral health. We offer several modalities, but when I look at the current state of our youth and some of our adults, right? And how rampant suicide is in our communities. This is why I chose to share this particular modality with you all today here at St. John's. The way that we break this down, and we just finished one of our 8-week sessions yesterday. So 8 weeks, 2 hours a week. We go through each key concept: hope, personal responsibility, self-advocacy, education, and support. And then we hone in to each of these recovery topics. We hone in, and at the end of the 8 weeks, you have written your action plan. You have a full action plan in your hand that helps you mitigate crisis. So that's what this is all about. With From the Heart, I started From the Heart in 2017, officially. All right, but my first event was in 2016. The event was called Rags to Redemption, and it was a suit gifting event / job fair for men coming out of incarceration and addiction. We hosted about 150 men that day. Now, there was a gentleman there who changed my life and changed how I would move in this work, because I hadn't quite found my niche at that time. I just wanted to help. I wanted to do something for humanity. I felt like I had taken enough. I said, okay, God, use me. Use me. I'm yours, right? But there was a man there that day, 52 years old. He had been released from prison for 3 days after serving a 10-year sentence. And after I did my presentation and my keynote, it was my event, so I said, I'm gonna do the keynote. How about that? So I walked around and I shook everybody's hand. We had about a 4 or 5 hour event where we fed the men. We had felon-friendly employers there talking about the application process, things of that nature. And then at the end, I had a personal stylist come from Nordstrom and help the men find the suits that fit. This particular individual from Alabama had never had a suit on his back at 52 years old. So I'm walking around shaking everybody's hand, meet everybody. Okay, the event is over. A month later, I'm in another space. This gentleman was there that was at my event. And he stood up. It was so embarrassing, I cried. But he stood up, and in front of everybody, he pointed to me. He said, because when he came to my event, he was missing some teeth in the front. He wasn't employed. He was smiling because he had gotten his teeth fixed, and he was working construction. And he said, I hesitatingly went to this man's event a month ago, and he gave me my humanity back. And that was the reward. That was the reward. I said, okay, this is the feeling that I want to feel for the rest of my life, whatever it means, because that's not what you expect. That's not what you expect, right? So from the heart, we have a monthly outreach the last Sunday of every month since 2018. We go to St. Francis Homeless Shelter. Pre-pandemic, we would set up buckets of chili, rice, cornbread, and we'd have a meal line. When the pandemic hit, I refused to let it stop us. So we began to hand out hygiene items, soap, and we would serve 400 to 500 people. And we just did it in February, right? So, and this little lady, I remember there was a time I was so frustrated in life and things weren't going well about 3 years ago. And she says to me, she says, Dad, why don't we feed the homeless anymore? I had taken maybe 3 months off. And I said, well, babe, I started to offer all these excuses, and our kids don't care nothing about excuses. For those of you who have children, they don't care nothing about excuses. She said, but Dad, I thought you told me that this was God's work. And we've been doing it ever since. But I'm gonna be a hypocrite in front of this little lady here. So when the pandemic hit in 2020, we were the only organization to convert the Wellness Recovery Action Plan to a virtual platform. And we started off with virtual sessions, and we would have 10 people in each session. This was in May of 2020. By August, we would have 50 people in each session with a waiting list of 25. So that's when we started. I had to build capacity because I was the only one trained in it and our outreach coordinator, right? So it was overwhelming. We were working too hard. I didn't have time to even realize we were in a pandemic because we were working so hard and so tirelessly for 2 years that before I knew it, it was time to take our masks off, right? It was time to take our masks off. So from the heart, we offer programs for adults and youth alike, right? We have multiple strategies in which we address mental health, behavioral health. We have a rites of passage program for our youth between the ages of 11 and 14, and then 15 to 18. We do one-on-one peer support sessions, right? We offer 8-week wellness sessions, and we also offer 3-day train the trainer sessions for those who want to become facilitators in this modality. So with that being said, I am going to turn it over for questions, please. Thank you.
Thank you for mentioning the road rage incident. Roz and I talk about this fairly often, and our big check is be careful, because the person that you engage, and it doesn't have to be road rage, might pull out a gun and shoot you. Could you comment on that?
In terms of the danger that exists, well, I say this and it always sends a chill through the audience. No experience comes into our life uninvited. No experience comes into our life uninvited. I've had so much pushback on that statement, but I find it to be true. About a year ago, I was taking my daughter to her mother, and we were at a stoplight and, just riding, and there was a young man, African-American male, hanging out of his window, hollering. Now, I don't know if I cut him off. I didn't know what happened, and I looked, and he's just yelling and screaming. And then he spits on my car. And my first instinct was to get out of the car, right? And then that voice said, if you get out this car, you're gonna have to either kill him or he's gonna kill you. And then I looked back at my daughter, and she was on her phone, so she didn't see any of this. And all of a sudden, it felt like a calm was poured over me. And when I looked back at the young man, what I saw was myself 20 years ago. And I was able to calm down. I was able to understand in that moment how I invited this into my life, how I had brought this on, how I needed to see me through my own eyes. This is how you used to be, man. You were really this mad and angry. So I used it as a lesson, right? But whatever it takes to bring down those energy levels, testosterone, whatever you want to call it, because I feel like we live in a very hyper masculine culture. And there are some people who wake up in the morning determined to hurt somebody. Just like there's some of us who wake up in the morning determined to help somebody, right? But I feel like the power of love can trump the power of hate if we are patient and if we're willing to exemplify, right? Be that example, be the change that we want to see in the world. And honestly, the worst thing I feel like we can do in those situations is get out of the car. If I would have got out the car, even if I would have approached him, amicably or sensibly, he wasn't ready to hear that. That's not what he wanted, right? There was another instance about 2 years ago, because when you do this work, I feel like you wear the work on your sleeve. You wear your heart on your sleeve. I was in King Soopers about 8 p.m. And this young man, African-American male, maybe about 30, 32, he had a knot right here on his head with blood. Now, this was an open lesion. And he walked right up to me. Security was following him, and he said, I'm about to do something real bad. He said, I don't need any money. I don't need you to do anything for me. I just need somebody to talk to. So I walked up and down each lane with this young man. I waved off the security, and he told me that he was a gang member. He had just been jumped and accosted on the bus stop. He went home to get his gun to come back and kill the men who had jumped him, and he found me. But in that instant, on his way back to the store with his gun, say there was an innocent bystander who became the victim of this young man's rage, or at the mercy of this young man's rage. There was nothing that anyone else could say. There was nothing anyone could say other than, I feel like, if he would have walked up to any woman, black or white, the way he looked, it would have been fearful, right? So he had to find somebody who looked like him. And my thing was, I didn't flinch. He was right here in my face. I could smell his breath. I could smell the alcohol on his breath. He had made up his mind, I'm going to get drunk and I'm going to go kill somebody. right? I was able to talk him down when he walked me through the checkout line, walked me to my car. We hugged outside, cried a little bit, embraced, and I never saw him again. So that's what I would have to say about that, my friend. Yes, sir.
How do we get your information out to the youth of today, or even older people?
Thank you for asking. And Miss Mandy?
Yes.
Yes. We had a brief moment in the back, and she really, in a very brief moment, she sent chills up my spine as we were talking about the condition of our youth. Our website, www.fromtheheartent.com. My personal email is halim@fromtheheartent.com. And we have so many areas and levels of engagement. Our biggest ambition is to make ourselves available and accessible to the people, at least in 2 or 3 public spaces a week, right? But then, like I said, we also host one-on-one and peer-to-peer sessions.
First, thanks. I agree with you on the leave early when you're driving, because, oh my God, there are insane people everywhere, and that's a great tactic. I just sort of drive along and let them weave around me. Otherwise, it's so annoying when you're in a rush. So there's one tangible way to change that problem. So thank you for that. I have 2 questions. One, do you work mostly with adults, or do you work with youth in schools or after school? And the second question is, if we had people here, volunteers, who wanted to support your efforts, what would that look like, and how would we do that?
Well, okay, to answer the first question, our work has become, so intense in terms of the clientele that we've begun to attract, right? So we have allies and partners in the community that do the after-school enrichment work, where we have more of a focused crisis intervention space that we've begun to occupy because of the need and because of the lack of services in that area, right? But I do lectures in school. I will host wellness affairs and things of that nature in schools, in rec centers, right? We've been asked to come and start doing services in diversionary spaces with some of our youth that are incarcerated or coming out of incarceration. And this is something that I'm currently building capacity for, right? So hopefully that answers your first question. In terms of the second question, with supporting our efforts, I would love to bring maybe, we can maybe do a 4-week, 2-hour-a-week intensive around the Wellness Recovery Action Plan, so you guys can be, become a little more familiar with the work. We always have our monthly family service day where everyone is welcome to come, welcome to donate hygiene items, socks, hand warmers, toothpaste, toothbrushes, deodorant, right, for our houseless neighbors for the most part. And we have an annual event called Triggers. Now, we hosted this event. It's a 2-day event. We started it in 2021. 2022, we did it December 17th. What this is, it is our annual Gun Violence Awareness and Suicide Prevention Wellness Weekend, right? So with our first installment of Triggers, I had identified, we put together a mini movie, all right? and we took 3 urban youth and we put highlights on their lives just in terms of what they look like on their best day. And then when these crises or these stressors or these triggers begin to happen, how they begin to teeter on self-destruction, right? So one young man that I brought to the table, and I get chills up my spine talking about this, but this young man was a young African-American male in the LGBT community. And I was very intentional because I wanted to shine a light, and because there's a lot of suicide and ideation within our LGBT community, brothers and sisters. So this young man, when he showed up, you know, he was very flamboyant, but we put that camera on him, and he was an anomaly. He was a force. I couldn't even believe it. At the end of the shoot, I was so excited, and I'm talking to him, and he's intrigued, and I'm telling him the work we do. 22 years old. He sticks his right arm out, and he had a fresh tattoo on his right arm, on his right forearm, and he says, "This is where I was going to cut myself on my next suicide attempt." And I said, "Your next suicide attempt? Well, when was your last suicide attempt?" He said, "It was 2 months ago. Me and my best friend, we agreed we were going to take our lives at the same time and meet each other in heaven. She succeeded and I failed. So I got this tattoo to honor her. And I was going to take my life a month after getting this tattoo. Then I got a call to be in this mini movie, and it's the only reason I'm alive." With our last installment of Triggers in December 2022, I brought together 2 young men. We were actually on the front of the Denver Post on January 16th behind this story. I brought together 2 men, one of whom attempted to kill, shot the other one 27 years ago. And we brought these 2 men together to talk about reconciliation, to talk about the recovery process, but most of all, to talk about what forgiveness looks like. Because the thing is, when Jonathan shot Matthew 27 years ago, Jonathan was 15 years old. Just got out of jail last year at 42 for attempted murder and other crimes. But when we do a deeper dive and we dig a little bit into the story, we find out that Jonathan had become the head of his household at 12 years old, responsible for 11 siblings. So he began a journey down a life of crime. So really shining a light on these situations and creating these spaces where healing can happen, right? So thank you for asking.
Thank you so much. I work for a theater company that does Shakespeare and violence prevention programming. And my question for you, we have these 45-minute workshops where we sort of role play with the students ways that if they saw something similar, they could try to mitigate the harm. What of like, I'm thinking of like your 5 key concepts and the wellness toolbox situation. With such limited time, if you had one thing to impart to these students in like such a tight time, what would your sentence, thought, message be? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, great.
I would go to self-advocacy, and I would focus on within self-advocacy, and within each of these modalities, we have different activities. But with self-advocacy, we have an exercise called the self-esteem tree. The self-esteem tree, right? And once we recognize, say the roots represent your strengths and your positive qualities, and your branches represent the relationships and the roles that you enjoy in life, right? Your leaves are representing your dreams and your aspirations, so on and so forth. But then after that activity, we talk about 10 steps to raise your self-esteem, right? Because low self-esteem exists in epic proportions. And I feel like our young people have not been told how great they are and how infinite the possibilities are for them and how they have the whole world at their feet, right? So when we help boost their self-esteem, and when they hear from a stranger that you are special, you are somebody, I just see the way their eyes light up like, really, mister? are you serious, mister? Right? They're like, wow, I can? Yes, you can. But it would definitely be within self-advocacy, because whenever we talk about self-advocacy, I really have to break it down, right? What does it mean to advocate for yourself, right? Most of our youth really don't know what it means to advocate for themselves. Most of our youth really don't understand the power of self-esteem. So that's where I would go with that. Absolutely.
I have a question.
Please.
A lot of what I see in the youth and in the world today so often is that very same thing that this person just talked about, you know, having a thing to do, right? So many programs have been cut, right? Music programs, art programs, and there's so many programs, like here in Colorado, there are just so many infinite programs that are not expensive that youth could get involved in, and for some reason don't, right? And one program that comes to mind very quickly is Westoneers. It's a horse program, and kids start at 9 years old. It's $15 every time they go and ride, but they learn things, right? At 9 years old, they have to go and clean the barn. They have to go and clean the horse. If they're going to ride, they have to be able to pick up that saddle and put it on the horse. You as a parent have to be there every Saturday from the time they're 9 years old till the time they're 18. And it's a wonderful program. I love it. My daughter did it. But one of the things that she learned in that program was self-reliance, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And self-advocacy. And you're 100% right. If you're telling kids, you're doing a great job, that means a lot when it doesn't come from the parent, because we're biased, right?
Absolutely.
But the other thing it teaches them, I think, is when she fell off that horse, you don't have another choice. You got to get back on that horse,
Come on.
right?
Yes,
You got to
yes.
finish that ride. And just so often, I feel like in schools where there are these amazing programs for students, our community continues to cut. Whenever we can, we cut a program. And I feel like, I don't know, if we're really worried about gun violence and all these things, when we get the opportunity to vote and actually make a stand, we should put our dollars in the youth. And more, at least this is my own personal opinion, I see we don't. And we rely too heavily on just the educators. Well, we're the parents. If you're a parent, you got to be there with your kid, right? Like you so beautifully, eloquently said in the beginning, I'm going to make time for my daughter. We have to be there.
Absolutely.
I don't know how to fix that one, but that's my opinion.
Well, and I'll say to that very briefly, Tina, is that our time? Okay. I was in court with one of my 15-year-old young men a couple weeks ago for grand theft auto. Now, I've been working with this young man for about 6 months, and luckily they threw out the case, and his mother brings him to me. The father is in his life, but the mother and father are not together. Do you realize his father is the one that taught him how to steal cars? And he won't even talk to me. I have reached out on several occasions. Sir, this is what I'm doing with your son. If I could get your support. He won't even talk to me, and I've had to, really go inside my mind and ask why. And one of the things that I had to think about was, okay, here's this father who hasn't really addressed his childhood trauma, right? Who doesn't like his life, who probably is addicted to a vice. And here I come, someone who looks like him, and he feels like I'm overstepping my boundary or stepping on his toes as a parent, when all I'm attempting to do is help his son, right? And something else I'm gonna say is I feel like a lot of times we may not see ourselves in those experiences. So I just went skiing for the first time 2 years ago because I never saw myself in the experience of skiing. I never, all my life, I always say that's what white people do. That's what, right? And you discount yourself and you just push it off. So, even with horseback riding, right? I think a lot of our youth, when they learn about the Bill Pickett rodeo, right? And they can see themselves in that experience, they'd be more likely to participate. But you just really inspired something in me in terms of, possibly identifying programs like that and bringing my youth to start, right? Bringing my youth and some of the demographics that I work with to start into that space. So thank you for that, please.
Hey, Mandy, I'll just ask you to wait for the mic just because the people online can't hear. Thank you so much.
Just to add to your previous comment, maybe there's an opportunity for volunteers to help some members of your program that could go to Western Ears and be with them, because I know in some cases there isn't a parent available because they're working. That's a huge, economic and social disadvantage. So that's, in some respects they can't see their own image riding a horse. But it's not because they don't want to, it's just that they aren't able to get there because there isn't an available parent probably working, or they have other siblings in the home.
Absolutely. Yes, ma'am. Thank you for that.
I was actually going to ask you, Halim, to talk a little bit about, are you able to work because you talked about the daily maintenance plan and the importance, for instance, for you and your daughter to spend time together. A lot of families are under a lot of pressure, and parents don't necessarily have the bandwidth, the presence. They may be in crisis. Do you have the ability, and are you doing any work, or is that sort of an edge that hasn't had space yet to help strengthen families? And we know that sometimes marginalized families end up in the foster care system because there aren't the resources that should be available to them. So is that a place that you're able to do any work, or is that not within your bandwidth right now?
That is such a beautiful question. We began doing multi-generational programming pre-pandemic. So we hosted a 6-week workshop in conjunction with the Crowley Foundation at Gateway High School. It was required that the parent and the youth would come. We would start off in a communal space, and then the parents would go off with one facilitator and the youth would go off with one facilitator. And what we would find was the youth were able to communicate. They had a voice, to where their voice was actually being considered because this was that type of space. So without that, what I find, without that parent buy-in, a lot of times, if we don't have it, it doesn't work. It's not sustainable without it, right? Because if the parents are unaware of the services we're providing, I even have a young man and his mother who come every Tuesday to my office. I work with the young man, and our associate director works with the mother, right? So that trauma, because a lot of times, like we were talking about, a lot of our adults are still dealing with unresolved and unaddressed childhood trauma. And they're speaking to their youth through that lens. They're moving through the world through that lens. I was doing a training at the Center for Trauma and Resilience, and I had a 65-year-old woman in the audience, Hispanic woman, beautiful person. And she had told a story about, she said that this guy, she was driving down the street and this guy jumped in front of her car and she almost hit him and she hit her brakes. And she said, he flipped her off. She said, so I tried to run him over. And I said, why did you try to run him over? Because he disrespected me. And I said, well, who taught you that that was disrespect? Well, everybody knows when somebody flips you off, it's disrespectful. My uncles. I said, okay, so you tell me this. What would you have done if that same thing would have happened when you were 21? I would have done the same thing. I said, so you mean to tell me at 65 you're still thinking from a 21-year-old mind? She looked, she said, I've never thought about that. And then I shared a story with her from the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People from Stephen Covey, when Stephen talked about he was on a train and there were kids being extremely disruptive, and the father of the children was sitting right next to Stephen. And Stephen said he took it as long as he could until the kids knocked his paper out of his hand. And then Stephen said he turned to the father and said, sir, your children are being extremely disruptive. Is there anything you can do? And Stephen said, the man, like as if he snapped back into reality, said, oh, I'm sorry. We just came from the hospital where their mother died. So they're not sure how to act, and I'm not sure how to act. Stephen said he felt so foolish. So I shared that story, and I said, we never know what somebody else is going through, right? So always extending that empathy and that compassion. I'll stop there.
Well, that is a beautiful message to end on. Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. It's absolutely wonderful. Thank you all for being here. As always, please join us at 10:30, either in person in the cathedral or online for our choral Eucharist, online at sjcathedral.org. Thank you all for being here. Next week, we will meet Jamie Duffy, who is the Executive Director of Youth on Record, another organization here in Denver doing amazing work for and with our young people and their creativity. So please join us. Thank you so much.